welcome to episode 3 of Deep Weird. As always, I am Jacob Pittman, and today we have a very special, very important episode. I really wanted to lull you into a false sense of security with episodes 1 and 2, so I tossed you a couple of real easy-to-digest ghost stories, not a whole lot of insane philosophy going on. But today, that's going to change. We are about to hear from Amira, who has been a practicing witch for a couple of years and has a lot of great experiences with ritual magic and a couple of other types of phenomenon. And this is also going to be the episode where I tip my hand and talk a little bit about my own personal theory on the paranormal and how all of this stuff might work. All of us cranks who study this stuff all have our own pet theory, and today you are going to hear a little bit about mine. But first, let's get to the star of the show. Here's Amira.
My name is Amira. I live in Arkansas, unfortunately, for the moment. I am a practicing witch of about, I think, 3 years now, and my primary focus on magic is concerning spirits and the dead. So, I practice, witchcraft. I tend to try and trace most of my sources back to more of the roots of, the old ways in the Germanic area. I pull a lot on Celtic, I believe, is Celtic, Germanic, and Nordic folklore and practices. I have, the way I got into it is I happened upon a server full of witches. Quote-unquote witches. They weren't exactly the most open-minded people, weirdly enough. But they had actually good resources, such as, I have a book about spell crafting, written by Aaron Murphy Hiscock, as well as the Encyclopedia of 5,000 Spells by Judica Illies, are the main resources I draw upon.
Pretty much those 2 books, plus the community of people that you were in, that you were kind of picking up stuff from.
Correct.
For the 3 people in the audience that don't understand what you meant, I'm assuming this was a Discord server that had a lot of witches in it?
Yes. It was a Witchcraft Revolving Discord server that I'm no longer in due to conflicting ideas on how magic works.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You'll definitely find some schisms with witchcraft and occultism for sure.
They were surprisingly conservative with how they viewed magic as being sort of this more rigid set thing with more strict rules than the way I see magic. Magic to me is not It's more of a force rather than a rule set. It's not defined by strict guidelines. It's just a thing that exists that can do just about anything.
Right, and I think that's backed up by the fact that somebody who uses tarot cards and then somebody who's like a Christian mystic who meditates doing Hail Marys have similar experiences and get similar results. And if it was the case that rules mattered, that you wouldn't be seeing that.
Absolutely.
One of the stories that you mentioned in your email is that you had, quote, a goblin steal your silverware.
Yes.
So why don't you describe to me that story, and then after that, I'll sort of dig into that a little bit.
Before I became a witch, I am a former Christian. I had a really big falling out on my faith due to reasons I don't really want to discuss on the air. But it's just, I used to believe in things and I became a non-believer. So I was basically searching for something to believe in. And, just kind of looking stuff up idly and not doing too much research. But I basically tried summoning a house spirit to try and prove to myself that something exists. And unfortunately it worked. It did not turn out very well, though, because the house spirit in question was very much neglected due to my not really paying attention to how things work. So the house spirit started to steal whatever it felt it could. Mainly, it decided to steal our forks. We went through 3 sets of, 30 forks. All of them just completely disappearing from the house. We double-checked the trash. We did everything we could. They vanished into thin air until I actually started practicing magic, and I got tarot cards that I used to start speaking with spirits that I'd noticed there was an angry spirit in my house that I put 2 and 2 together. I've since placated the spirit, and it now is my house spirit that helps keep the house in order. It actually has helped fix appliances on more than one occasion. One time, my dishwasher had broken down. It would not work no matter what we could do. And I just, on a whim, decided to ask the spirit for help, and the next day, it was working again.
For the people that are listening, the house spirit, the house brownie, the house goblin, there's many words for it, is a very common type of thing that has been around in sort of Middle European mythologies for a long time. Why don't you run through sort of the ritual, the summoning ritual that you did to sort of make this happen? What did that look like?
So, it was a very simple sort of spell. Basically, there were only a few ingredients. I had a piece of candy. They like sweets. And I spoke it aloud, my intent of inviting a spirit into my house to help me keep things in order and to prove itself to me, in a sense. And made it a bit of a grand gesture, not anything in particular. I didn't do, a ritual of candles. This is before I managed to get into all of that. But it was still a grand sort of gesture with a lot of energy put into it. That was focused around this piece of chocolate that I offered up to the spirits.
And it seems like that this was done in kind of a moment of a crisis of faith, right?
Yes.
Because this was kind of a desperate move of there's got to be something out there.
Yeah.
I'm putting everything I've got into figuring this out.
Yes. And I believe all of that culminated into that energy being pooled into a specific point, causing it to have the intended effect.
At what point do you notice that things are starting to go missing from the house?
A few months later, I noticed that despite keeping the house clean and everything, that we're starting to get low on forks. So I talked with Dad about it, and he thinks that we've just accidentally thrown some forks away, or I have, or something has happened like that. So we get a new set of forks, and we put all of those up, and things go by, another couple months go by, and suddenly, after 4 months, we are down to 3 forks. We turn the house upside down. We cannot find a single fork anywhere. No matter what we do, we don't have any dogs or any other creatures inside the house aside from a couple of cats. We check the vents because those are pretty big in our house, so we open those up and we look in there and check under all the beds, under all the furniture. There is not a single fork anywhere. They're just gone. They've vanished. And at around that time, I had started dipping my toes into witchcraft when I got the inkling that maybe that little ritual I did during my crisis of faith actually had an effect. And I started looking into that.
I think I already probably have an idea of what you did, because I've got a lot of passing familiarity with this kind of stuff. But what was the steps to sort of placate the house spirit so that it would stop stealing items?
Firstly, I had to make a sort of bargain, shall we say, with it, in order to get it to calm down. I used my tarot deck as a form of communication between me and the spirit, because I can speak verbally, but it being an incorporeal creature has no verbal components to speak of. Using the tarot cards, we come to an agreement that should I give him a serving of honey or milk at least once a month, he will stop stealing the forks and instead start helping up around the house like he was wanting to originally. There are a few other stories that I could bring up. One, for example, of my cat disappearing at some point, coming back like 3 months later, somehow alive. It's hard to explain. It's kind of like, I believe this cat, I call her Amy, is my familiar. She helps me practice the magic. And she one day had just vanished from our house. And I thought she was dead. While it did upset me, it also helped me reevaluate the way I view magic a little bit, from it being just sort of like this thing that is there that I can do, to being more like, why, like, I used to pray for God, pray to God for a few different things, and it made me realize, why should I have to pray to God when I have the power to do it myself? I can cast magic, I can bring about my own, I can materialize my own power, and help aid me and my family with it. And it's weird, but I feel like it was a message she was trying to convey to me, to be more willing to let things go, and to focus less on the physical things and more on the spiritual. There's another time. I have this obsidian mirror, and I've been dabbling with scrying. And my dad used to have a job as a truck driver, working over the roads. And I was able to look into this mirror, and I was able to see things reminiscent of a place in Texas, where I called him up, and he happens to be driving through Texas that very day. He's just about to leave it when I call him. And it's just interesting, and it was freaky for him and a little bit for me as well.
So let me make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So you sit down, was your intention to see, like, why don't I just, like, goof around and see if I can see where my dad is right now? Okay. And you sit down and you see sort of a landscape that looks vaguely Texan, and then you call him and you're like, hey, are you in Texas right now? And he's like, yes.
It was dry bushes and sort of like a half-desert grassland, which is just Texas in general until you get more to the east side.
So far, we've talked about sort of generic house spirit summoning, and we've talked about a little bit of remote viewing. So the big one that I think is going to be the most important for this episode was, you said that you were able to contact your grandfather and get a lot of, like, closure from this contact.
This was after a while that I've actually been practicing magic, and I was more sure of myself. I knew how to do rituals at this point. I've done a few rituals, one to improve my luck, because I had notoriously terrible luck throughout all my life. So, after building up that confidence, I sat down, utilizing the resources I had, to craft a ritual to summon forth the spirits of the dead. And I used that ritual to contact my grandfather, who several years prior, I don't remember exactly how long ago, it's a bit of a blur, but he died very suddenly.
So before we get into the results, do you remember enough about the ritual to be able to describe it?
Yes, this was before I started writing down the ritual, but it was such a vivid encounter that I can remember it all perfectly. So, there's 5 different core ingredients to the ritual. Number 1 is I had an amethyst gemstone to help boost the communication with spirits. 2, I had a set of gray candles to, as a focus for the magic. 3, I had, set up a cautionary circle to, just in case, because you never know when summoning things, that you could just summon up some evil, mean, fey creature that wants to freaking burn your house down. So I set up a circle. I set up a temporary altar to put the offerings on, and I made him his favorite breakfast that I could recall. I handcrafted him a breakfast of buttermilk biscuits, eggs, and bacon. And I laid that out. Do you want me to continue on to the actual steps of the ritual?
Yeah, sure. Let's just get all the details in there.
The ritual itself involves, first of all, laying out the circle. Well, no, actually, before you lay out the circle, place the offering. Then you surround the offering with the circle. Because if you mess with anything in that air, it will break the circle. Then I started the chant. I call it a chant, but it's more of just a sort of a rhyme, shall we say. I don't remember the words of the rhyme. It's been a long time. But I make this sort of like 4-sentence sort of poem that rhymes, and end it with a closing phrase. For me, that it is so. All of the parts of the rhyme are to help in the building up and collection of energy to put forth towards the ritual. The rhyming helps you focus your thoughts towards the specific intent of the spell, with the ending phrase being used to close off, to end the rote, and to make sure the energy is being directed properly, and not just still wafting about the air wildly. Once I said the ritual, I lit the candle and waited. And after a few minutes of waiting, the candle started flickering rapidly, like it was about to just be snuffed out. And in that instance, suddenly, I could smell my grandfather. He had a particular smell about him. I'm not sure if he had a cologne or something, but I could smell him and sense his presence in the room. The actual communication with him was somewhat one-sided. Once again, the spirit is not able to speak in actual words, and the responses I was getting was more so sort of like emotional talking, like a sort of feeling of being happy to see someone that you've missed for a long time, and the sorrow of past mistakes and such.
So in this case, there literally was a like physical component of like the phantom smell, like you are in like a felt presence, like you're positive.
I was positive. I could feel a presence, but I could not identify it as my grandfather. But what was the identifying factor was I could physically smell him in the room with me. And it was the most bizarre thing. I've never experienced anything like that. But I could smell him and feel his presence, feel his emotions flowing through me. It was the sort of pinnacle moment of my craft. It was a thing that made me sure that magic is real and that I am a witch and that I can do this stuff. I am not alone in my beliefs.
So this was sort of, you used to be a Christian, so you'll probably understand this reference. This is sort of your faith the size of a mustard seed moment.
Yeah, I suppose so.
And so before this, you were doing stuff, you did the house spirit thing, you did the remote viewing thing, you had some other experiences, but in the back of your head, was there always kind of this doubt, like, am I just like LARPing? Am I just like getting lucky? Is all this stuff just some sort of weird coincidence?
Absolutely. It was this moment that made me feel sure that this was real. That sort of questioning is still there occasionally, but in my opinion, it's always healthy to be constantly questioning everything in the world. You can never be 100% sure in what you know.
How did this experience, because obviously you said that your grandfather passed like really suddenly and nobody was really prepared for it. How did this sort of experience help you, I guess, like process like that grief, I suppose?
In life, my grandfather was a very standoffish sort of person. He was definitely deeply ingrained in a lot of toxic masculinity. He had issues connecting with people and showing his emotions and that sort of stuff, and it kind of always kept me at a bit of an arm's length. And when he died, it wasn't just sudden. I remember, like, maybe a week or two before that, I remember hearing him praying and saying he was ready to go, and that he was tired of his life. And ever since then, I had this suspicion that my grandfather might have committed suicide, and talking to him as the spirit, I could feel that it wasn't him giving up. It was just his time. He was tired, and he couldn't hang on anymore. And though I feel as though he did have some inkling of wanting to end his life, I think that it was just, in the end of the day, just a horrible coincidence. But more than anything than just soothing my worries and fears, it allowed me to connect with him on an emotional level that I was not able to connect with him in life. He was the same, but somehow different as the spirit. He was much more content and happy. I could certainly feel that. It was like the experiences had fundamentally changed him. And it let me say goodbye. I was not able to really talk with him just before his death. This is the really heavy parts. So, my grandmother had breast cancer, and it had come back in the later years of her life, and that's what we were dealing with when he died. So most of our energy and focus was on trying to help my grandmother feel better, and trying to help her through the breast cancer. And I did not get to spend... I never really did get to spend the time I wanted to with my grandfather. He was a good man. And, I just wish he let himself be a little bit softer than he felt like he had to be.
There's going to be people that listen to the first half of this interview, and they think, like, oh, haha, the house spirits, isn't that silly? But what I really want people to take away from this is how these sorts of practices can have very real, very, like, emotional impacts on people's lives, and that there is, like, this stuff is useful. It's not just doing tarot cards. It's not just doing the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram with your cat in your room and pretending to be a wizard. Like, this stuff has real outcomes and real, like, emotional value.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I want to thank you for being comfortable enough to share that story, because it's not a lot of people would do it. Now that you have sort of left Christianity because of various reasons, there's probably some other people listening to this that are in very similar situations to the one that you were in, where they're stuck in Christianity for one reason or another. They feel like they're not able to really take part in it seriously, and they want to maybe like try something different. What advice would you give people like that? To people that are struggling, that, like, what advice would you give them to find a practice that, like, that fits them better, so that they can have these sort of, like, broadly emotionally impactful experiences that maybe they feel like they need but aren't getting from the faith they're currently in?
I would say you should reflect on the things that you pray for. Prayer is effectively, at the end of the day, very similar to how magic works. It's just generally a lot less glamorous. There is a lot of different faiths out there. Not just Christian and Abrahamic religions. There's so much more out there. You can find a religion for just about anything. And if not a religion, at least a type of faith. And I firmly believe that if you do truly need to feel that there is something more and you want to learn more, you should, just as you do with just being a Christian, take a leap of faith. Have faith in yourself to do what you think is right for yourself. And I believe that if you do that, you will find your path.
And the last question that I wanted to ask here is, do you carry any of the sort of like Christian messaging with you at all into any of these into this new practice? Like, do you, because I know there's a lot of people that aren't Christian, but they sort of like respect the philosophy of Jesus and like that sort of thing. Like, even in like occult circles, the story of Jesus is like a well sort of like respected, I guess, occult sort of allegory or metaphor. So that would be my question. Is there like any of that, anything from your Christianity that you carried forward with you?
Personally, no. It's a complicated subject. I could say I respect Jesus as an individual, but I no longer agree with any of the practices of Christianity as I once had. I don't know if I really want to say this in a recording, but personally I feel as though Christianity had deceived me in many ways.
I mean, that makes sense, especially if you're in a, because you said that you're in Oklahoma, right?
Arkansas.
So the type of Arkansas. The type of Christianity that is going to sort of be prevalent in that area is going to be the sort of American-specific, sort of Southern Baptist, Protestant type of Christianity, which I think many people would agree with you, even a lot of other Christians, that it's a kind of a deceitful branch of Christianity.
I can agree that. I will say this, though I no longer agree with Christianity or any of its practices, no matter the branch, I still respect you for finding your own faith. I have lost my train of thought.
Right, I mean, I understand what you're trying to say. You're trying to say that, like, just because you have moved on to a different type of practice doesn't mean that somebody who's, like, finding these sorts of things from a more mainstream religion is, like, less valid.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there anything else you want to say at the end here?
Stay in drugs, don't do school.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks for coming in here and telling an emotional story. Thanks for volunteering that for the audience. I think they're really going to enjoy it.
thank you for having me and taking me seriously.
The discussion portion of this episode, and also in several of the episodes coming up, are going to mention something called idealism. Understanding idealism is really important to being able to understand what I'm talking about when it's brought up, and also really important to being able to understand my own personal thoughts and opinions on a lot of these types of paranormal topics. Because right now, I really believe this might be pivotal to understanding how some of this stuff could be happening. And I want to make sure that from this point forward in the podcast, if I reference idealism or any concept surrounding it, people have a chance to actually understand what I mean. I've decided that the easiest way to handle this is just to write in this quick segment in this episode where I explain what idealism is briefly and tell you where you can get more information about it. This is not at all an exhaustive explanation, so if you're a more skeptically minded person, you're going to want to go check out the sources I give you if you want more details. First of all, to cite my source on all of this information, the type of idealism that I lean into the most is called analytic idealism, and it's a philosophy pioneered and popularized by a philosopher named Bernardo Kastrup. It's very important to emphasize here that Bernardo Kastrup is not some crank. He has 2 PhDs, one in computer engineering and the other in philosophy, and his first job was working at the CERN facility on the teams involved with discovering the Higgs boson at the LHC. He actively published papers up to about 2019, and he makes most of his papers on analytic idealism available on his website. He also very frequently publicly debates people who are antagonistic to idealism and hosts those debates on his own website to prove that he is absolutely not afraid of academically defending himself in a debate. Many of his cited sources for his work are also available on his website, and he has hours and hours of interviews and podcast appearances that are available for free on YouTube and all over the internet. Everything that I'm about to say either comes from one of his talks, one of his posts on his website, or his book titled Why Materialism is Baloney. So with the sources out of the way, what exactly is idealism? In order to really properly define the term in context, first we need to define its major competitor in philosophy and science, which is materialism, more commonly referred to as physicalism. Physicalism is the idea that the universe is made up of physical processes and physical matter, and that consciousness is an emergent property of the physical matter that makes up your brain. This would mean that the fundamental building blocks of the universe are made of matter, and consciousness arises from that matter. Idealism is the exact opposite idea. Idealism states that consciousness is actually the fundamental building block of the universe, and that matter is derived from consciousness, and that we are all each individual pieces of a much greater original consciousness that is more or less dreaming our entire reality. Already, you're probably seeing some red flags here because idealism has been around for a very long time, and it has been abused by cranks and predatory mystics for centuries. But the specific type of idealism being pushed by Kastrup, called analytic idealism, has several key differences from their less reputable and more easily debunked versions of the idea. Here, I'm going to address some of the very obvious immediate criticisms of this idea and try to swat away some of these red flags. The first question would be, if we are currently living in a non-real dream coming from a higher consciousness that we are all a part of, why can't we read each other's minds, and how come we can't change our environment simply by thought? If all of this is true, I should be able to just will reality to be different. The answer to both of these criticisms, according to Kastrup, is the idea of disassociation. Our consciousness is completely disassociated from the original consciousness and also completely disassociated from each other. That's why, no matter how hard you try, you can never walk through a brick wall just by projecting your will to be able to do so onto reality. There is still a world that appears to be physical, external to your mind, because the source consciousness is holding that external world together, completely disassociated from any of your thoughts or actions. So, do we have any evidence that something like this is even possible? According to Kastrup, yes, we do. There are 2 studies about disassociation that Kastrup very frequently references in his work. The first is called Dreams in Dissociated Disorders by Deidre Barrett at Harvard Medical School, published in 1994. This study found that in patients with dissociative identity disorder, which is the controversial psychological disorder that causes what is colloquially known as multiple personality disorder, each individual personality inside the host personality can play separate roles in the dreams of the host. Here is a quote from that study to clarify what we mean here. The host personality, Sarah, remembered only her dream from the previous night that involved hearing a girl screaming for help. Alter, Annie, age 4, remembered a nightmare of being tied down naked and unable to cry as a man began to cut her. Anne, age 9, dreamed of watching this scene and screaming desperately for help, apparently the voice in the host's dream. Teenager Joe dreamed of coming upon this scene and clubbing the little girl's attacker over the head. In her dream, he fell to the ground and she left. In the dreams of Anne and Annie, the teenager with the club appeared, struck the man to the ground, but he arose and renewed his attack again. 4-year-old Sally dreamed of playing with her dolls happily and nothing else. Both Annie and Anne reported a little girl playing obviously in the corner of the room in their dreams. Although there was no definite abuser identified after manifesting at this time, the presence at times of a hallucinated voice similar to Sarah's uncle suggested there may be yet another alter experiencing the dream from the attacker's vantage. This paragraph is a little confusing, but what it's describing is 4 or 5 individual separate personalities inside of one person's head, all being present in the same dream, dreaming that dream from different perspectives. Kastrup's assertion is that this models exactly what is going on in reality all the time. Every conscious being, human or not, is one of the alters of the original consciousness, and we are interacting with each other from different perspectives, even though in reality we are all in the same host mind. Just to underscore how powerful disassociation is, another study very often cited by Kastrup is called Sight and Blindness in the Same Person, Gating in the Visual System, published by Hans Strasberger and Bruno Waldvogel. This study was published in 2015, and they put a woman with dissociative identity disorder in which one of her alters could see and her other alter was blind into an EEG. And the results showed that when her blind personality was in control, the visual centers of her brain actually stopped working and she went blind. And once her sighted personality returned, this effect was reverse. So this type of disassociation is powerful enough to literally stop you from seeing what is in front of your functional eyes. Another interesting find in some of these studies is that once a person is treated for dissociative identity disorder and undergone certain therapies, all of the personalities can sort of be put back together as one in the host personality, and the host has memories of what happened while they were acting under their other personalities. So it would seem that a reassociation is possible. At this point, I'm sure that more intelligent listeners are probably correctly thinking, but isn't dissociative identity disorder extremely controversial scientifically? How do we even know that it's real? Kastrup also has an answer for this. In 2014, a study was published called Dissociative Part-Dependent Resting State Activity in Dissociative Identity Disorder, a Controlled fMRI Perfusion Study. The premise of this study was that one group of people would be a control group of actors pretending to have dissociative identity disorder, and one group would be a group of patients allegedly presenting the symptoms. Then everyone would be put into an fMRI scan in a double-blind study to see if the scientists could spot the actors from the allegedly real cases. The results were very clear. Dissociative identity disorder presents unique activity in the brain, and the fakers were easily spotted. This is very strong evidence that this type of disassociation is real. So to go all the way back to the original questions, we can't read each other's minds because we are totally disassociated from each other, and we can't impact the outside world by thought because we are also disassociated from the original mind. It's very important to include here that while this concept of the original mind sounds a lot like some sort of god, Kastrup is very hesitant to give it any of the definite qualities of being a god. He doesn't describe it as all-knowing or all-powerful, and questions how intelligent it would even be or need to be. This is absolutely not a New Age style theory of source or an apologetic for some kind of Abrahamic god. This idea is extremely complex, and Kastrup has written multiple books and published many papers, as well as done probably hundreds of hours of talks and interviews all over the internet discussing his ideas in great detail. It is way beyond the scope of this episode or even this podcast to get into every single crevice of this idea, but if it interests you, look into his work. And if you are at all still skeptical about all of this, I would advise you to actually do the work before deciding that all of this is fake nonsense. Another person that deserves an honorable mention in this segment is Donald Hoffman, who is a professor in the Department of Cognitive Sciences at the University of California, who is currently working on a model to mathematically back up idealism and propose experiments to actually test predictions based on idealist frameworks. This is very important to note because people who are scientifically minded will say, okay, can we test any of this? Is there any predictions that can be made that we can do anything with any of these ideas, or is this all just naked philosophy? For now, here are the basic ideas that I want you to take away from this, and as the podcast progresses, I'm sure that I'll probably sprinkle in some other little breadcrumbs and other ideas from this philosophy. 1, the universe is mental. 2, there is a source consciousness that we are all disassociated from. 3, we are also disassociated from each other. 4, this is not some absurd New Age or The Secret style theory where we can essentially perform magic and change reality with our thoughts. And 5, reassociation into the original mind might be possible, which would give us memories of everyone else who has been reassociated. I know this segment has been long and confusing. I would highly recommend you give it another listen later, and please go directly to the horse's mouth on this. Bernardo Kastrup is very, very open and transparent. His books are cheap and easy to find, and he has tons of freely available information on all of this stuff. And now that this is sort of covered, let's get back to the discussion portion of this episode. Now we're back from my long rant that I had to do in the middle of this episode. In terms of the interview, this is kind of split into 2 segments. We have the first segment that is like funny, haha, goofy witchcraft. And we have the second segment that is actually like an important emotional story about emotional closure and all that stuff. So let's do the fun stuff first. Olivia, you used to work in a store, a metaphysical shop where people would come in all the time asking you for crystal advice and what kind of spell they should do and all that sort of stuff. So what do you think about little house spirits, little gremlins, little spells? What's your read on all that stuff?
90% of the stories I heard about it, people wanted them gone immediately because they were evil.
Yeah.
I didn't get to hear too many of the fun little house fun guys that would help out. It was mostly like, this is threatening my children.
Yeah, what kind of rock do you usually give people for that?
A black stone, usually. We recommend a black and a white. So like a selenite and an obsidian, or like like a quartz and a onyx, something like that.
Okay, so you get one black stone and one white stone. What is that?
Black to clear it, and then white to help you put more pure intentions in.
Yeah, you're getting... It's
so you're taking away energy, but then you're refilling it, basically.
Yeah, you're doing like a... Well, and also like there's some symbolism there with like the yin-yang symbol.
Yeah, exactly.
With like the positive and the negative, and you're doing like a reset. I like a lot of the stuff in the beginning of this. So the house spirit stealing the forks and then sort of making amends with it and then having it like help around the house or whatever. This is kind of an old idea, but I wonder how much of this is there is a established historical legacy of this kind of thing, and how much of it is we now as like modern people and modern pagans practicing neo-paganism, which is obviously different from paganism because much of paganism has been destroyed. And also the term paganism itself is kind of meaningless because the Christians use that to describe anybody who's not Christian. So you have like 45 million different native beliefs all over, like, because usually when people say paganism, they're talking about European stuff, typically. It's what they mean colloquially. So you're talking about like a million different native practices. But when people say that, they're talking about neo-paganism. And I wonder if neo-paganism specifically has this idea of like the goblin or the brownie that runs around the house stealing shiny objects. And you have to make a deal or placate it to get it to stop doing that and instead help you in some way or form. I wonder how much of that is an artifact of neo-paganism and how much of that is an artifact of original paganism. And if it is an artifact of original paganism, I wonder how much of that is the idea of like the tulpa or the egregore, where your thoughts and beliefs of how something is manifests like parts of that in reality. And we talk a lot more about that in an episode that will be coming up about an Argentina werewolf. There's your teaser. Keep watching till about the middle of the series. And that I actually have the episode order figured out now as of recording this. The other thing that I really liked about the house spirit section is her idea of like trying to talk to the spirit through the tarot cards, because it doesn't have a physical body, which means it can't really have like a physical language. So it has to talk through like ideas and concepts. And that reminds me of something that Greg Newkirk says, which I'm not sure. I just said that I remember the episode order now, but I actually don't know if I mentioned them in either of the first couple of episodes that are before this one. But Greg and Dana Newkirk are my favorite sort of paranormal investigator, writer, artists. And Greg Newkirk says this thing that art is the language of God. So once you have no way of conveying language, you can only convey those abstract concepts that would usually be sounds with your mouth through like ideas and images. And that gets pipelined into art. So I really like that idea of being like, oh, this thing can't communicate with me directly. It can only communicate through like ideas and symbols, which is an idea that I really like. The remote viewing story is fun. The episode right after this one is going to go really heavily into remote viewing. So I would say for now, take a note on the remote viewing stuff. And next episode, we are going to go very hard into remote viewing. It is the central pillar of that episode. Let's move on to some of the more, I guess, serious stuff. And this is where my idealism rant is going to very quickly become relevant. So I hope you remember that from 7 minutes ago or whatever when I said that. So Olivia, what is your thought on spirit communication, talking to the dead? What do you think about that?
I haven't personally, in my experience, heard anything from anyone that I found very concrete with that sort of thing. I'm not like opposed or whatever, but I just haven't met anyone who had a realistic story about it. Yeah.
What do you think about this story? What would you rate sort of like the, I don't want to say So I should preface this by saying that me and Olivia go into a lot of these stories with the base assumption that the people talking to us aren't lying. If I thought the people talking to us were lying, I would put them in a separate folder. I literally have a separate folder in our interview files for people that I think are lying. So if you're making it to the air, I believe you. So I don't want to like rate this as like an honesty barometer or whatever, but like what do you think of this story specifically as somebody who is like skeptic about these kinds of things?
I think she's going about it a much more logical and like thought through way than a lot of people I've heard. So it definitely lends credibility to what she's talking about. And I mean, it'd be crazy to lie about her grandpa. You know what I mean?
Yeah, to a literal nobody off the internet who is making a show that literally doesn't exist yet.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm sure I've made this point in other recordings, as of right now, for the first 12 episodes that we record, all episodes 1 through 12 are getting released in one block. So from episodes 1 through 12, at a very minimum, no, this is not a real show. This does not exist. I have not put this out into reality yet. So there is... It would be insane to lie to me. You don't get anything out of it. You're not getting famous. You're not getting money. I obviously don't pay people to be on here. I'm broke as hell. No, nobody's getting paid. So like, what do you get out of it other than being able to talk to me in a Discord call for an hour, which is not that much of a payoff. Like there's tons of people that you could be talking to in a Discord call for an hour. So where I really want to hammer down on the idealism stuff and why I chose this episode specifically to be the vector for introducing the idea is that this sort of like summoning ritual really lines up with a lot of stuff in that philosophy in like an almost scary way when you really start, like, I guess not scary, a spooky way when you really start breaking it down. So first of all, we've got this idea of, so first I should say that I don't think that ghosts or spirits or whatever you want to call them are literally like the soul of the dead person. I just don't think that's true, and I don't think it makes that much sense. But I also don't want to imply that in this story there's some, because Amira obviously contacted something that like is her grandpa as far as she is concerned. So I don't want to like I'm not trying to say like, no, that's not what happened. I'm trying to say that it's much more complicated than that. Like, I don't think it's literally the like living consciousness brain of a person who was dead that you're now calling forward. What we have here is we have a ritual. And if you've ever done a ritual before, which I have a bunch of times for meditation purposes, you realize pretty quick that all of the ritual stuff that you do really helps, like, it gives you like a slight shift in consciousness. When you like turn off your phone, turn off all the electronics in your room, turn off the light candles, light incense, and like start prepping to do something, it really does. And if you've never done it, you probably won't really understand what I'm saying, but it really does like change how you're thinking. It gives you a slight shift in your conscious mind and like what you believe is possible. So we have this ritual aspect, and then we have the appearance of this, I guess for lack of a better word, like spirit of the grandfather. And we get the phantom smell, and and she describes, the thing that is the most interesting about this is that she describes it as like, there wasn't a conversation, there wasn't like a full body apparition, nobody was talking, but she got like this feeling, like it was all emotional. It was like, I felt how he was feeling, and he was the same but different, as if the experience had fundamentally changed him. And that is where I immediately started thinking about the idealism stuff, because I think what is probably going on here is that we have the grandpa who has died and has been reassociated into the background consciousness. And then we have Amira, who is performing this ritual, getting into a meditative state, deeply believing in this stuff, and having the intention of like, I want to basically channel this person. I've prepared this very specific meal. I've done all this specific stuff. And then doing all of that creates a very slight reassociation back into the pool, because we're, like I said in the rant, we're disassociated all the time walking around, but some form of reassociation is possible. So what this is doing is it's creating an altered state of consciousness where you're able to very, very, very slightly reassociate back into the original mind for a short period of time and pull information out. So her grandpa's like consciousness and memory and life and all of the things that make him him are inside the original consciousness. So even though, like she said, the experience of dying has fundamentally changed him because he's not him anymore. He's back in the soup. He's back in the pot of consciousness. But that whirlpool that makes up him is still like in the river a little bit. And you can tap into that and get that information back if you take a lot of the right steps and you're particularly good at meditation, or you like really seriously believe in this stuff. I think that you can tune your brain in to pulling some of that information out. And that's what I mean when I say that it's not, I don't believe that ghosts are dead people, but at the same time, it's more complicated than that. Like that, all of the thoughts and memories and all of that stuff that made that person could still be rattling around in the background consciousness information that is holding the rest of reality together. And I think the idea that she has the phantom smell, which all of your senses are something that your brain does itself. Like you can't, when you smell like a rose, there's no, like that smell is your brain's experience of smelling a rose. And there's no physical component to that. It's like, yeah, you can say, oh, the molecule of the rose oil goes into the fucking little sense hole inside your nose, and then that does a neurotransmitter, and then you compute that as the smell of a rose. That's all true, but the individual conscious experience of that smell after all of the physical stuff happens, that is something that is in your brain specifically. So you could imagine that if you are sort of tapped into this river of consciousness, that you're going to start seeing and smelling familiar things that the sector of that river that you're tapping into is familiar with. So of course she would start smelling like what he smelled like all the time, because he was walking around smelling like himself all the time. So that was like an experience that he had that's in there. And the thing that really sells this for me is her description. And I didn't like prep her on any of this stuff. This interview is completely raw. So her saying it was like an exchange of emotion. It was like a free flowing emotional thing where I like felt how he felt and how he had changed. That is exactly what you would expect from a scenario where all of this idealism stuff is true. And I would say that, one, remember the phantom smell thing, and remember this idea of your senses being sort of abstract and inside the mind, because that's going to be really important for the next episode. And I think that about covers my deranged ranting for this episode. So keep an eye out for the phantom smell thing next week. Keep an eye out for the rest of the series about any time we talk about anything that rubs up against this idealist philosophy. And what do you think about all that, Olivia? What do you think about the soup, the consciousness soup? What do you think about getting in there, pulling out information? Do you like the idea? Do you think it's possible?
I'd like to be in a soup, I think.
Yeah, you'd like to be in the soup?
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of think the same thing. Like, it would be nice to... Well, and I talk about in my... I think I talk about it in the rant about how... Or no, it's in another discussion episode where we talk about it, and I don't remember which one it is. So, if you're listening to this right now, this is either going to be a callback or foreshadowing, and I'm not sure which one. But out of all of the ideas of the afterlife, the one that I think is the most likely is that you die, you probably reassociate back into the original mind, and I think you have access to all of the thoughts and feelings and emotions and lives of everybody else who has lived and died. I don't know if you can, like, relive those as a dissociated thing. Like, I don't know if you can go in and be like, oh, there's Taylor Swift. I'm going to go live my life as Taylor Swift real fast and do the Eras tour and see what that was like on the ground. I don't know if you can do that, but I think you probably will have the memories of that accessible to you, as long as the person who's in there is also dead and also in the suit. And then from that point, I don't know what actions you can take. I don't know what you can do. I don't know if you're just stuck thinking about it for eternity. I have no idea. But I genuinely think that scenario is more likely than any other scenario, including the scenario that when you die, it's just over. Because to me, that just like intuitively is boring and doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, every time we turn over a new rock in science or philosophy, shit gets more interesting. So I have a very hard time believing that it's like, oh, you're born, you live, you die, it's all physicalism, nothing is going on here, it's just a bunch of little balls bouncing around in space. That just doesn't, it intuitively feels not good. And there have been a lot of extremely intelligent people that have made very, very good, very cogent arguments about why not only is that a boring and intuitively lame idea, but there's like evidence on the table that it's obviously not correct. And Bernardo Kastrup and Donald Hoffman, who I talked about in the big 12-minute segment or whatever it was on Idealism, are two of those people who are like very high caliber PhD thinkers who are one of which, well, one worked in academia for a long time. The other one is still currently working in academia, who are both publishing papers all the time and are like not cranks. Like, these are serious people that are talking about this kind of stuff. And it's a good set of ideas going forward for the human race, I think. Hello and welcome again to the conclusion segment. This episode was really dense. I already pretty much said everything that I wanted to say about everything in it. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we are at DeepWeirdPod. We also have an active Discord community that you can join. You can find the links to that over on my old Probably Jacob YouTube channel. I'll probably post the links around Twitter. I'll probably post them over on the Patreon, which you should consider supporting if you've enjoyed the show. If you have a paranormal experience that you would like to share with us, please email me at deep.weird@gmail.com. If you have been enjoying the show, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you can. That is one of the most important things you can do to help us out. Thank you again to Amira for sharing such a personal story. I very much appreciate it. Deep Weird is written and produced by me, Jacob Pittman, and the music that you have been hearing throughout was produced by Griffin Dodefray. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.